Sometimes love doesn't arrive with grand promises. Sometimes it begins with hunger. And sometimes a single loaf of bread can weigh heavier than the stars. The wind of Valor Outpost carried dust and the faint scent of iron. Every night, after the last shuttle left orbit, Jonas Hale swept the crumbs from his bakery counter and listened to the silence settle. It was a good kind of silence, one that felt earned after years of noise, war, and regrets. He would lock the doors, dim the lights, and watch the glow of the twin moons slide over racks of unsold loaves, except for the one that always vanished. It had started 2 months ago. One missing loaf each night. Always the same type, simple wheat bread, nothing fancy, nothing worth a report to the colony patrols. Still, Jonas's curiosity gnawed at him harder than the loss of flour. He had baked through battles and star quarantines. No thief was going to outpatience him. That evening, he hid in the back room, pretending to close. Through the glass, he watched the shop's front door crack open. A small shadow slipped inside, light as breath. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old by human standards, though she was clearly not human. Her skin glimmered pale blue, eyes too large for her face and glowing faintly like polished sapphires. She moved with clumsy precision, bare feet silent on the floorboards, whispering to herself in a language made of clicks and hums. Jonas watched as she stood on tiptoe, stretching for the lowest rack of bread. When her fingers brushed the crust, the loaf toppled, thud. She froze. The sound echoed through the empty bakery like a gunshot. Jonas stepped forward. "You could just ask, you know." The girl gasped and stumbled backward, clutching the bread to her chest. Her lips parted, revealing small, translucent teeth. "Please, no guards. Don't take me." Her voice trembled, each word rehearsed through fear. Jonas raised his hands slowly. "Hey, easy. Nobody's taking anyone." He crouched to her level, the scent of flour and ash between them. "Hungry?" Her throat bobbed. "Not for me, for Mother." The word came out cracked as though it hurt to say. Jonas felt the weight of that single word settle in his chest. He'd seen hunger before. On refugees after the Orion collapse, on soldiers trapped behind lines. But hunger mixed with love? That was something sacred. He gestured to the counter. "Sit. Eat a piece before you go." She shook her head violently, blonde silver hair flying. "If I eat, she less." The honesty of it cut deeper than pity. Jonas went to the oven, grabbed another loaf still warm, and set it beside her trembling hands. "Then take 2, 1 for each of you." Her wide eyes flicked between the loaves and his face as if waiting for the trick. Finally, she whispered, "You human. You not afraid of blue?" Jonas smiled faintly. "I've seen worse colors." It was a weak joke, but she smiled, small, confused, beautiful in its simplicity, then ran out the door clutching both loaves like treasure. The next morning, he found a note tucked under the door, written in shaky handwriting with purple ink. "Thank bread. Sorry crumb mess. Mother say stars watch kind men." He kept that scrap pinned to the wall beside the register. That night he left 2 loaves out on purpose. By the 3rd night, curiosity overtook patience. Jonas followed her. The outpost streets were a maze of rusted cargo containers and leaning steel shelters. He kept his distance, staying in the shadows as she darted between flickering lampposts, clutching the bread like a secret. Finally, she slipped through a broken maintenance gate and into the collapsed lower district, the part of Valor most humans avoided. Inside a half-ruined shuttle hull, the air smelled of damp metal and burned circuits. There he saw her kneeling beside a woman whose skin was a deeper violet, her breathing ragged, her eyes half-closed. The woman's clothes hung loose over bones. Her hair, once silver, had dulled to gray. The little girl pressed a piece of bread to her lips. "Eat, Mama, warm." The woman's hand trembled as she took it. "Where did you—" Then she saw Jonas. He froze in the doorway. The child spun around, shielding her mother with both arms, eyes blazing. "I not tell her. I not tell him come." Jonas raised both palms. "It's okay. I just wanted to make sure you were all right." The mother's voice rasped like dry leaves. "You're human," he nodded. "Guilty. You should leave." Her tone carried exhaustion, not hatred. "If they see you here, they'll think you trade with us. They'll make you disappear too." Jonas stepped closer despite the warning. The glow from a broken neon panel washed his face in blue light. He knelt beside her. "You're sick." She gave a soft laugh that ended in a cough. "Observant." He looked around the shelter. Makeshift bedding, empty ration tubes, a child's drawing on metal, 3 stick figures holding hands beneath twin moons. The same handwriting from the note. "What's your name?" he asked Mayra. She said softly, "And my daughter, Leorian." Leorian peeked from behind her mother's shoulder, clutching the half-loaf like a talisman. Jonas hesitated. "I'm Jonas. I own the bakery near the docks. Why follow us, Jonas of Bread?" Mayra asked. "Because I wanted to know who kept stealing from me," he said honestly, "and because no one should have to steal to stay alive." Mayra's lips curved faintly. Kind words from the same species that built the walls keeping us out. He didn't argue. He'd helped build those walls once, in another life when he'd worn a medic's uniform and followed orders that condemned alien families to starve behind quarantine lines. He still woke at night hearing their voices. "I can bring you medicine," he said quietly. Her gaze sharpened. "Why, out of guilt?" "Maybe," he admitted. "But guilt's better spent helping someone than haunting me." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "There is a clinic north of here. They refuse us entry, but they sell supplies under table. The cure's name is Theragen V. Too costly for me." "How much?" 3,000 credits. Jonas let out a low whistle. "For that price, it better bake bread and sing lullabies." Leorian blinked, confused. "Bread sing?" "Not yet, kid," he said, smiling despite himself. "But maybe someday." Mayra's smile was faint but real. "You joke like humans who haven't broken yet," she murmured. "Maybe I'm just cracked," he replied. She looked away. "Then we're all fragments of something better." Over the next week, Jonas kept coming back. He'd bring food, sometimes books salvaged from old transport crates, sometimes just his company. Mayra would sit near the entrance to catch the filtered sunlight, her daughter drawing shapes in dust beside her. He learned their world, Thynal Prime, had been glassed during the wars, its survivors scattered across colonies that barely tolerated them. In return, they learned his past, the medic who'd refused an order to abandon alien patients, court-martialed, discharged, and left adrift. He told it like a confession. She listened like a priestess who had already forgiven him. Between them grew an unspoken warmth, fragile but persistent. One evening, as he prepared to leave, Mayra said quietly, "If they catch you helping us, you'll lose everything." Jonas shrugged. "I've already lost everything once. Turns out it's survivable." Leorian ran to him with a crumpled flower made of foil. "For bread, man!" He took it gently. "For Leorian, the bravest thief I know." The girl giggled, hiding behind her hands. When he looked back at Mayra, her expression softened in a way that made the small room feel brighter. "Thank you, Jonas of Bread," she said. He wanted to say something light, something to break the silence pressing around them, but instead, the words came out raw. "You shouldn't have to thank me for doing what any decent person should." She tilted her head, studying him. "You still believe in decency?" He met her gaze. "I'm trying to." Their eyes held for a long heartbeat, until Leorian yawned loudly and announced, "Mama, you look melty." Mayra laughed, a sound delicate and unfamiliar like glass wind chimes. Jonas smiled. "I'll bring more tomorrow." That night he couldn't sleep. He sat in his dark bakery, the ovens cold, thinking of Mayra's cough and Leorian's thin arms. He remembered the medicine name, Theragen V, and the clinic she'd mentioned. He checked his old accounts, barely enough to cover half the cost. Then his eyes fell on the framed license above the counter, his one link to legitimacy. He pulled it down, staring at the embossed signature of the colony board. Tomorrow, he'd pawn it. The following evening, as he approached the shelter with medicine in hand, he heard laughter inside, a rare, fragile sound. For a moment, he stayed outside the doorway, listening. Leorian was telling a story about a bread knight who fought hunger dragons. Mayra's soft voice replied, "And who gave the knight his courage?" "The baker," the child declared, "because he made magic bread that healed hearts." Jonas swallowed hard, blinking against the sting in his eyes. He stepped inside and placed the small vial of medicine on the table. "Let's see if we can make that story true." Mayra stared at the vial, realization dawning. "Jonas, how did you—" "Don't worry about that," he said. "Just take it." "You can't afford not to," he interrupted. "If this works, maybe you'll teach me how to make bread that heals hearts for real." For a long time, she said nothing. Then she reached out and touched his wrist. Her fingers were cool, faintly trembling. "Humans are strange," she whispered. You burn worlds and then plant flowers in the ashes. He smiled faintly. Flowers need somewhere to grow. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain, rare on Valor. As thunder rolled across the horizon, Jonas looked up at the bruised sky and felt, for the first time in years, something like hope. He didn't know that patrols were already whispering about stolen medicine, or that his name would soon find its way into their lists. All he knew was that somewhere in a ruined shelter, a child was sleeping with a full stomach and a mother might live to see another dawn. And for Jonas Hale, that was enough. Rain fell on Valor for the first time in months. The colony's metal rooftops sang beneath the downpour, washing away the usual haze of dust and exhaust. Jonas Hale stood outside his bakery, watching thin streams of water carve trails through the red sand. For once the sky looked alive, Kang, and so did he. Inside, the ovens glowed softly, their heat fogging the windows. He had been baking since dawn, a quiet rhythm guiding his hands. Need fold breathe. It was easier than thinking about the risk he had taken last night. The vial of Theragun V was gone, and so were 3,000 credits. He should have felt regret. He didn't. Every loaf cooling on the racks reminded him why he'd done it. Somewhere in the ruins below, a mother was breathing easier. When he finished, he packed a small basket, 2 loaves, a jar of honey, and a folded blanket. Then he locked the shop and walked through the wet streets toward the lower district. The shelter looked different under the rain. Water dripped through cracks in the hull, forming tiny rivers across the floor. Mara sat near the entrance, her violet skin glistening with moisture. Her eyes clearer than he'd ever seen them. She was alive, visibly, undeniably alive. Leoraine ran to him, her small feet splashing in puddles. Jonas, Mama stand today. She walk 5 steps. Her excitement filled the air like sunlight. Jonas laughed, scooping her up before realizing she was soaked. 5 steps? That's almost a marathon around here. The child blinked. What's marathon? A long walk you take for no good reason, he said, setting her down. Mara looked up, smiling faintly. She hasn't stopped talking since morning. You've created a storm worse than the weather. Good, he said. Noise means living. Her smile deepened, then softened into something he couldn't name. You shouldn't have come today. The patrols are restless. They're searching the market district. Something was stolen. Jonas sat beside her, brushing damp hair from his face. I heard. Sounds like a real criminal's out there. You jest, she murmured, though worry clouded her features. They'll connect it eventually. The medicine was marked. I wiped the cereal, he said. Old habit. She gave him a look of surprise and quiet understanding. You were more than a medic once, weren't you? He hesitated, then nodded. Smuggler sometimes. For people who couldn't afford the official routes. Medicine, food, information. The line between healer and criminal got blurry fast. And now you bake bread, she said softly. He chuckled. People still need to eat. Safer trade. Less jail time. Her laughter was quiet but real. The sound filled the small space, chasing away the rain's monotony. Jonas felt the warmth of it settle deep in his chest. Hours passed easily. Leoraine insisted on showing him her new drawing. 3 stick figures again, this time holding a loaf the size of a planet. Across the top she had written in crooked letters, My family. Jonas traced the drawing with his thumb. That's a big loaf. Big hearts make big bread, she said, serious as a scholar. Mara looked away, blinking hard. She has your stubbornness already, she murmured. Jonas pretended not to notice the shimmer in her eyes.
Guess she takes after her mother, then. Their gazes met, quiet understanding passing between them.
For a moment, the shelter didn't feel like a ruin. It felt like home. By evening, the rain had stopped. The colony lights flickered back to life, painting the horizon in dull gold. Jonas rose to leave, but Mara stopped him. You risk too much already, she said, her tone gentler than before. The patrols will come here sooner or later. You must not be seen with us. He exhaled slowly. If I leave, who's going to bring you fresh bread? Her lips curved. You're insufferable. Occupational hazard, he replied. She studied him for a long moment, then reached out. Her fingers brushed his sleeve. Barely a touch, yet it felt like a vow. Thank you, she whispered. Not for the bread or the medicine, for seeing us. Most humans look at us and see ghosts, he smiled faintly. Ghosts don't make me laugh. Something unspoken hung between them. The hum of the wind, the faint drip of water, the child's soft humming in the corner. It all seemed to pause around them. Finally, she pulled her hand back. Go before I make you stay. He turned toward the door. Too late, he said quietly, then slipped into the night. The next few days blurred together. News spread through the colony, a theft from the corporate medical storage. Missing Theragun V, reward offered. Patrol drones began circling the markets, scanning faces. Jonas kept his head down, baking through the noise, pretending nothing had changed. But every night he took food to the ruins. Mara was getting stronger. She could walk without trembling now, and her skin had regained a faint, healthy glow. Leorin never stopped chattering, filling the silence with stories about dragons made of starlight and humans who baked planets out of dough. Sometimes Myra laughed until she coughed, and Jonas found himself laughing too. It felt dangerous, the kind of joy that made you forget how fragile the world was. One night, as he prepared to leave the bakery, the doorbell chimed. A figure stepped in, tall, uniformed, the gray coat of a colony marshal. The emblem on his shoulder glinted. Security Division Outer Sectors. Jonas Hale? The officer asked. Jonas's pulse quickened, but his voice stayed calm. That's me. Want a loaf for an arrest? The man didn't smile. Routine inquiry. We're investigating a theft. Medical supplies, high value. You've got a clean record, but your background caught attention. Because I used to be a medic. Because you know how to move things quietly, the officer said. Someone matching your description was seen near the docks 2 nights ago. Jonas forced a chuckle. Only thing I move quietly is dough. It screams if I'm too rough. The officer's gaze lingered a moment longer, then shifted to the shelves. Nice place. Shame if it got shut down for aiding refugees. Jonas met his eyes. You'd need proof. Proof has a way of surfacing, the man said, turning toward the door. Stay out of trouble, Baker. When he left, the bakery felt smaller, colder. Jonas stood still until the sound of boots faded into the rain-soaked street. He exhaled shakily, then packed the evening's bread and slipped out the back. The shelter was dark when he arrived. Only a faint glow from a salvaged lantern lit the room. Mara sat wrapped in a blanket, Leorin asleep beside her, clutching the foil flower Jonas had given her days before. He set the bread down gently. You came late, Myra said softly. Had company? He replied. Marshal. They're closing in. Her expression hardened. Then stop coming. Can't. You must, she insisted. If they catch you, they'll blame us. I won't survive watching another human die for me. Jonas crouched beside her. You're not a burden. You're the only thing keeping me from turning into the ghost you thought I was. Her breath hitched. Jonas? He smiled faintly. Don't make this harder. She looked at him for a long time, her eyes shimmering in the lantern light. Violet and gold. Twin galaxies holding too much history. You don't even know me, she said finally. I know enough, he whispered. You're kind, stubborn, and you make me believe people can be better. That's enough for me. She looked away, blinking fast. You say these things like you mean them. That's because I do. For the first time, she didn't argue. She just reached up and brushed a raindrop from his hair, her hand trembling. You shouldn't care this much. It's dangerous. Caring's always dangerous, he said. But it's the only thing that makes us human. Leorayan stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about stars and dragons. The moment broke. Mara pulled her blanket tighter, composing herself. Promise me one thing. Depends what it is. If they find out, don't come back here. Don't try to protect us. Jonas hesitated, then nodded slowly. I'll promise if you promise to keep living. Cruel bargain, she murmured. He smiled sadly. I'm good at those. He stood to leave, but before he reached the doorway, her voice stopped him. Jonas, the night you brought the medicine, you saved more than my life. He turned, confused. What do you mean? You gave Leoran back her laughter. I hadn't heard it since her father died on Thynel. For that I owe you everything. He met her gaze. Then we're even. Because she gave me something back too. What's that? Hope. Mara's lips parted, but no words came. He left before she could answer. Back in the bakery, the night was silent again. Jonas sat behind the counter, staring at the rain streaking down the window. His hands ached from work. His clothes smelled of flour and smoke, but his thoughts were elsewhere, in a broken shelter, with a violet woman and her blue-skinned child who'd somehow stitched his heart back together. He didn't see the shadow move outside, the same marshal from earlier, pausing to watch through the glass, noting every habit, every delivery box Jonas carried after dark. The next morning, Jonas woke to pounding at the door. He opened it to find a neighbor, an old trader named Bren, pale and shaking. "You hear the news?" Bren gasped. "They found something. The serial on that stolen medicine traced to the docks. Patrols are locking down sectors. They're saying the thief might be someone hiding refugees." Jonas felt the blood drain from his face. "When?" "Now, they're searching every block." Jonas didn't answer. He grabbed his satchel, filled it with bread, water, and his last few credits. If the patrols reached the lower district, Mara and Leorian wouldn't survive another raid. He bolted through the back alley, heart hammering. As he ran, the morning sun broke through the cloud, sharp, golden light spilling over the battered rooftops. He thought of Mara's smile, of Leorian's laughter, of the word family written in crooked letters on a piece of scrap metal. He didn't know how much time he had, but he knew one thing for certain. He would not let them be taken again. Not while he could still breathe. The alarms began before dawn. Jonas Hale woke to the metallic wail echoing across Valor Outpost, sharp and hollow as hunger. Patrol drones swept low between rooftops, their red beams slicing through the thin morning fog. The colony was under lockdown. He had known this day would come. He just hadn't thought it would come so soon. Jonas snatched his satchel and slipped out the back door of the bakery. Flour dust drifted in his wake like snow as he vanished into the alleys. His heart kept time with the sirens, fast, unsteady, human. The lower district was already crawling with patrols. They moved in rigid lines, boots splashing through puddles left by the storm. Loudspeakers barked orders. All residents remain indoors. Harboring non-registered species is a Class 3 offense. He kept his head down, blending into the crowd of workers rushing toward the transport hub. One wrong glance could expose him. He could almost feel the officer's gaze from the night before still burning between his shoulder blades. He reached the ruins by a different route, winding through collapsed tunnels that smelled of rust and wet stone. The entrance to Mara's shelter was half hidden behind a stack of broken generators. He tapped twice on the side panel, the signal they had agreed on if things went wrong. A pair of small fingers appeared, prying the panel aside. Leorian's wide eyes blinked up at him. "You came," she whispered. "Couldn't stay away," he said, forcing a smile. "How's your mother?" "She tired, but breathing better. Mama said you shouldn't." "Yeah, she's probably right." He ducked inside before the child could finish. Mara was sitting against the far wall, her blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. The color had returned to her skin, but her face was drawn with worry. "The patrols have been scanning every shelter," she said. "They're taking names, marking walls. They'll find us soon. Then we move you," Jonas replied. "There's an old water treatment plant outside the western ridge. Abandoned for years. You'll be safe there for a while. And what about you?" Her tone carried both gratitude and accusation. "I'll cover your trail." "By doing what? Lying to soldiers until they shoot you?" She shook her head. "No, Jonas, we can't keep running." "Then we stop running," he said. "We fight smarter." Mara frowned. "What do you mean?" He crouched beside her, lowering his voice. "I know a way to make them stop hunting you, at least for a while. The patrols are chasing whoever stole that medicine. If I break into the corporate storage again and make it look like an organized heist, they'll assume the thief left the planet." "You'd steal again?" she asked softly. "I'd steal for less," he answered, "but this time I'm not taking medicine. I'm taking data. Shipment logs, access keys, evidence that the company's been hoarding supplies meant for refugees. Once that leaks, they'll have bigger problems than you and your daughter." Mayara's eyes widened. "That's suicide," Jonas smiled faintly. "Maybe, but it'll buy you time." Leorian tugged at his sleeve. "What's suicide?" Mara's voice trembled. "Something humans are too good at." Jonas reached out, brushing a strand of silver hair from the child's forehead. "It means doing something scary so someone else can smile tomorrow." The little girl considered that seriously, then nodded. "Then be careful, Breadman." He laughed quietly, though his chest ached. "I'll do my best." By nightfall, he was back in the upper city. The corporate sector loomed above the slums like a second planet, glass towers and polished streets untouched by rain. Drones glided between them, scanning every face that passed. Jonas wore his old medic's coat, the insignia faded but still official enough to pass brief inspections. He carried a crate labeled nutritional supplements, empty except for a compact cutting torch and a pulse dampener stolen years ago from a mining ship. He walked straight through the security gate, nodding to the board guard. Late delivery for the medical division. Order 7 and 9. The guard glanced at the crate, then at Jonas's weary expression. They never stop making you people work, huh? Jonas grinned. Healing never sleeps. The guard waved him through. Inside, the corridors gleamed white under sterile lights. Machines hummed behind glass walls, producing vials of medicine that would never reach the people who needed them. Jonas's jaw tightened. He found the data room at the end of a restricted corridor. A biometric scanner guarded the door, pulsing blue. He pressed the dampener to the wall. The light flickered, dimmed, and died. The lock hissed open. Inside, rows of consoles lined the walls. He slid a drive into the nearest port and began the download. Numbers cascaded across the screen. Inventory lists, coordinates, bribe records. Proof that could destroy a corporation. Minutes stretched. Sweat rolled down his temple. Every sound in the building felt amplified. The hum of vents, the distant echo of footsteps. Then came a sharper sound. The click of a safety disengaging. Step away from the console, Hale. Jonas froze. The voice was calm, female, familiar. He turned slowly. Marshal Conway stood in the doorway, sidearm raised. Rainwater dripped from her coat onto the polished floor. Didn't think it'd be you, he said. You always did like dramatic timing. Turn off the drive. Can't, it's almost done. Her eyes narrowed. You're out of your depth. You know what they'll do if you leak that data. Maybe, but I also know what they're already doing to the refugees. Conway sighed. You were a good medic once, Jonas. You could have rebuilt your life quietly. Instead, you're playing hero to aliens who'd leave you bleeding in the dirt. He smiled without humor. Maybe that's the point. Someone has to break the pattern. The console beeped. Transfer complete. Jonas yanked the drive free, slipping it into his coat. Don't make me shoot you, Conway warned. Then don't pull the trigger, he said, and hurled the crate at her. It crashed into her legs. The gun fired, burning a hole in the wall. Jonas sprinted past, ducking into the main corridor as alarms screamed to life. He ran through sterile halls that turned into a blur of white and red. Drones dropped from ceiling ports, sirens wailing. He dived into a maintenance chute, sliding 2 stories down before landing in a pile of packaging foam. The drive thudded against his chest like a heartbeat. Outside, the rain had returned. He sprinted through alleys, weaving between transport crates until the lights of the corporate towers faded behind him. By the time he reached the ruins again, dawn was breaking. The sky glowed faintly pink over the horizon. His coat was torn, his hands bleeding, but the drive was intact. Myra met him at the entrance, eyes wide with disbelief. You're insane, she breathed. Probably, he said, panting. But I got it. She helped him inside. You're hurt. Just a scratch. Liar. He sank to the floor, laughing weakly. Fine, maybe 2 scratches. Leorine appeared with a rag and a jar of water, mimicking her mother's stern expression. Hold still, bread man. I doctor now, he smiled despite the pain. Best doctor in the galaxy. Myra pressed a strip of cloth against the burn on his arm. Her touch was gentle, her face inches from his. You shouldn't have done this, she whispered. I wanted to stop running, he said. This might buy us a future. She looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head. You risked everything for people who aren't even yours. Jonas met her gaze. You are now. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Silence followed, soft, heavy, filled with all the things neither dared to say. Her fingers lingered on his wrist before she withdrew, her cheeks darkening with color. Outside, the rain eased into mist. Somewhere far above, a drone searched for signals it would never find. The data Jonas had stolen was already transmitting through his hidden channel to off-world networks. Soon the truth would spread. That evening, when the colony lights dimmed, Myra sat beside him in the shelter's doorway. The air smelled of wet stone and fresh bread from the loaf he'd brought. You've started something you can't undo, she said quietly. I know. If they catch you, they won't. I made sure the trail points to the outer rim. Let them chase ghosts. She turned to face him. You risked your freedom for strangers, why? Jonas thought for a long time before answering. Because I spent half my life patching wounds caused by men who said they were just following orders. I'm done following. I'd rather stand beside someone worth saving. Her voice softened. You think I'm worth saving? He smiled, eyes on the horizon. You're proof that we all are. They sat in silence, the kind that felt safe. Leorian slept inside, murmuring in dreams. The storm had passed, leaving only the hush of dripping water. After a while, Mara leaned her head against his shoulder. You're a foolish man, Jonas of Bread. Wouldn't be the first time, he murmured. Then perhaps foolishness is contagious, she said. Almost to herself, he turned toward her. But she was already closing her eyes, resting. For a heartbeat, he simply watched the rise and fall of her breathing, the quiet miracle of it. Far above them, in the polished towers of the corporate sector, Marshal Conway stared at the empty data console. A single message blinked on the screen. For those who were never meant to be saved. Her expression softened, conflicted. She shut down the alarm and whispered, You're still the same idiot, Hale. Back in the ruins, Jonas lay awake long after Mara and Leorin had fallen asleep. His muscles ached, his wounds burned, but his heart felt lighter than it had in years. He had stolen many things in his life. Credits, medicine, secrets, but tonight he'd stolen something far rarer. Hope, and this time, he had no intention of giving it back. Morning on Valor was never quiet. The colony hummed with the sound of air filters and power converters, the background rhythm of a world that refused to sleep. Yet that day the hum felt sharper, charged with tension that clung to the air like static before a storm. Jonas Hale awoke to the flicker of emergency lights dancing across his bakery wall. His pulse jumped before his mind caught up. A coded alert flashed across the civic feed. Security sweep, outer sectors. Suspected data breach. He sat upright. So the corporation had found his trail after all. Through the window he saw patrol carriers hovering low over the rooftops, their engines glowing red beneath the gray sky. Loudspeakers repeated the order he had dreaded. All civilians remain indoors. Any assistance to non-registered species will be prosecuted under planetary law. Jonas exhaled slowly. There would be no more hiding. He threw on his coat, grabbed a bag of bread, and tucked a small transmitter into the inner pocket. It carried the evidence he had stolen, a backup of the logs already sent off-world. Even if he fell, the truth would keep moving. The streets were almost empty when he stepped outside. A few traders hurried to shutter their stalls, their faces drawn tight with fear. Jonas kept walking, forcing his pace to look ordinary. His reflection in the puddles looked older, heavier. The years he had stolen for himself now demanded payment. At the junction near the water towers, he spotted the first checkpoint. 2 guards in gray armor scanned pedestrians with hand devices. Behind them, a transport drone hovered, its camera eye sweeping from face to face. He could have turned around. Instead, he lifted the bag of bread higher and smiled faintly. Breakfast delivery, he said as he passed. One guard frowned. Baker's out early. Fresh dough waits for no one, Jonas replied, and walked on before the man's suspicion could bloom into words. By the time he reached the ruins, the sun had climbed high enough to burn through the haze. The air shimmered with heat, and the scent of ozone hung heavy. He ducked through the broken panel and called softly, Leorin? A small head popped up from behind a crate. Jonas, Mama said you wouldn't come. She said you'd be smart. Guess she doesn't know me that well yet, he said. Where is she? In the back, packing. He followed the child into the narrow corridor of the old shuttle hull. Mara was kneeling beside a pile of folded blankets, her movements brisk and practiced. When she looked up, relief and anger collided in her eyes. You should have stayed away, she said. Couldn't. They're moving closer. We have to go now. She straightened slowly, her breath tight. Where? There's an old freight tunnel beneath the aqueduct. It leads out to the canyons. You'll be safe until things cool down. Jonas, listen. No. He held her gaze. We don't have time for arguments. Mara's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't protest further. She turned to Leorin. Pack your drawings, little star. Just the ones you can carry. The child nodded solemnly and began stuffing her papers into a worn satchel. Jonas moved toward the entrance, scanning the horizon. The air shimmered again, heat or engines, he couldn't tell. Then came the low thrum of approaching vehicles. His stomach sank. They were already here. Patrols, he whispered. Get behind the bulkhead, now. The roar of turbines grew louder. Dust whipped through the cracks as 3 hovercraft settled outside. Harsh light spilled through the gaps in the wall, cutting across the floor in strips. Jonas drew the small pulse pistol he had kept hidden in his belt, an antique from his smuggler days. Unreliable but better than empty hands, Mara caught his wrist. Don't. If you fight, they'll kill you. If I don't, they'll take you. She shook her head fiercely. I won't watch you die because of us. He wanted to argue, but the door burst open before he could speak. Armed officers poured in, their armor gleaming like wet stone. Hands up. All of you! Jonas stepped forward, placing himself between the soldiers and the 2 figures behind him. They're unarmed, he said. The lead officer's visor glinted. Jonas Hale, you are under arrest for data theft, smuggling, and conspiracy with alien entities. He almost laughed at the phrasing. Alien entities. They couldn't even say people. Behind him, Leorin whimpered. Mayara's hand covered her daughter's mouth. Jonas lifted his arms. Let them go. They're sick, not dangerous. The officer tilted his head. You think you get to negotiate? Not negotiating, Jonas said. Confessing. Everything you're looking for, it was me. Not them. The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them muttered. Orders say bring in all 3. The leader hesitated. We take the woman and child for questioning. Jonas's heartbeat thundered in his ears. You won't touch them. Before the officer could answer, another voice cut through the chaos. Stand down. Marshal Conway stepped into the doorway, coat flapping in the hot wind. Her eyes moved from Jonas to Mayara, then back again. This isn't your fight, Hale, she said quietly. You can't save everyone. Maybe not, he replied, but I can save them. Conway sighed. Always the same stubborn fool. She turned to her men. Secure the area. No one fires unless I say so. The soldiers lowered their weapons slightly but didn't retreat. Jonas could feel their fingers still poised on the triggers. Conway looked at him again. You know what you stole. If this leaks, it'll collapse half the corporate board. You think they'll let you walk away? I didn't plan on walking away, he said. Her expression softened. You're wasting your life. He shook his head. No, I'm finally using it. Mara stepped forward then, her voice steady despite the fear tightening it. If you must take someone, take me. Spare my daughter. Conway studied her with something almost like respect. You don't get to decide, Jonas interrupted. You already have what you want. I sent the data off-world hours ago. You shoot me, it spreads faster. You let them go, maybe I tell you where the backups are. Conway's jaw clenched. You wouldn't? Try me. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the hiss of the hovercraft engines. Finally, she exhaled. 1 hour. Then I come back, and if you're still here, I arrest whoever I find. Jonas nodded. That's all I need. Conway gestured to her troops. We're done here. For now. The soldiers filed out, muttering among themselves. When the last engine faded, Jonas sagged against the wall, the pistol slipping from his grasp. Mara rushed to him. You shouldn't have done that, he smiled weakly. Seems to be a pattern. She touched his cheek, her hand trembling. You gave us time. We won't waste it. You'd better not, he said, trying for humor, but his voice cracked on the last word. Leorin appeared beside them, clutching her satchel. Mama, are we running again? Mara knelt and smoothed the child's hair. Yes, little star. Just one more time. The girl looked up at Jonas. You come too? He hesitated. Not today, her face fell. But you promised you'd teach me how to make star bread. I will, he said softly. When the sky's quiet again. They left at sunset. Jonas guided them through the hidden passages under the water lines, until the canyon walls rose around them like rust-colored mountains. The air smelled of salt and minerals, the wind sharp enough to sting. At the mouth of a narrow cave, he stopped. This is it, he said. Old Smuggler's Path. It connects to the canyon basin. From there you can follow the ridge to the free ports. Myra turned to face him. You're not coming. He shook his head. If I run with you, they'll never stop hunting. Someone has to mislead them. You can't stay in the colony. They'll kill you. He smiled faintly. Maybe. But if they're chasing me, they won't be looking for you. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind tugged at her hair, scattering silver strands across her face. She reached out and gripped his coat, fingers digging into the fabric. You foolish, stubborn man. Guilty as charged. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead lightly against his. If we survive, I'll find you, he swallowed hard. You'd better. Then she kissed his cheek, gentle, lingering. The kind of touch that left a mark even the wind couldn't erase. Come, Leorayan, she whispered. The child hugged Jonas's legs fiercely. Don't let the bad humans get you, breadman. He crouched to her level. Don't let the bad days stop you from laughing, little thief. She smiled through tears. Deal. He watched them disappear into the canyon's glow, two silhouettes shrinking against the dying light. When they were gone, he turned back toward the city. By the time he reached the outskirts, night had fallen. Patrol beacons blinked across the skyline like a constellation of warning lights. The streets were nearly deserted, the curfew in full effect. Jonas slipped into his bakery one last time. The oven still smelled faintly of yeast and honey. He moved through the familiar space, touching the counter, the mixing bowls, the rows of cooling racks, all the small things that had once made up his quiet life. He found a scrap of parchment and wrote a note in careful script. To whoever comes next. Feed the hungry, even when it costs you, especially then. He placed it on the counter beside the remaining loaves. Outside, the rumble of engines drew closer. The patrols were returning, punctual as gravity. Jonas stepped out into the street, coat whipping around him, the transmitter heavy in his pocket. Above him, lightning flashed against the low clouds, turning the whole sky white for an instant. He smiled at the irony. He had spent years running from storms, and now he was walking straight into one. Far beyond the city, in the canyon's safety, Myra stood at the cave's mouth and watched the flashes on the horizon. Each burst of light made her heart tighten. Leoran tugged at her hand. Is he coming, Mama? Mara whispered, he will. When the sky is quiet. She looked down at the loaf he had packed for them, still warm, wrapped in cloth. On the crust, carved with the tip of a knife, were 3 words. Be worth it. Tears blurred her vision. She held the bread close, feeling its heat seep into her palms. For the first time since fleeing her world, Myra Vorthani believed she might be. Night had swallowed Valor whole. The city lights burned dim through a haze of smoke drifting above the refinery sector, and the smell of ozone mixed with scorched metal hung heavy in the air. Jonas Hale moved through the empty streets with deliberate calm, though each step felt heavier than the last. The patrols had sealed every exit. Drones traced his thermal signature across rooftops, and his name now bled through every wanted list on the network. He was no longer the quiet baker of Dockside Row. He was the fugitive who had made the system bleed. Still, there was no regret in his stride. Every wound, every loss, every chase had led to one truth. Mercy was never free, but it was worth the price. He stopped at the end of an alley where the shadows ran deepest. The wind carried faint echoes from the city center. Orders shouted, engines rising. Somewhere out there, Conway's patrols searched for him again. He imagined her face, the tired conviction behind her eyes, and wondered whether she already knew he would not surrender. Inside the bakery, darkness waited like an old friend. He entered quietly, locking the door behind him. The place felt hollow without the hum of the ovens, without the smell of bread cooling on the racks. The note he had written still lay on the counter. He traced the words with his thumb, half smiling at his own stubborn handwriting. Feed the hungry, even when it costs you, he whispered. Guess I should take my own advice. From a hidden compartment under the floor, he retrieved a small comm beacon, an illegal transmitter tuned to off-grid frequencies. The final upload sequence glowed on its cracked screen. The stolen data had already spread across 3 colonies, but this signal would send it farther, out past the border worlds, to the human settlements that still believed in accountability. Once sent, there would be no undoing it. Jonas powered the beacon. A soft hum filled the room as blue light bathed the walls. Outside, thunder rolled across the horizon. He placed the transmitter by the window and waited for the signal to stabilize. Then the door shuddered. A voice called through the rain. Jonas Hale. Open up. He recognized it instantly. Marshal Conway. No soldiers this time, just her. Jonas hesitated, then unlatched the door. She stepped inside, dripping rain onto the floor, her gray coat heavy with water and exhaustion. For a moment, they simply stared at one another. You always pick the worst nights for visits, he said quietly. Her eyes scanned the room, settling on the glowing beacon. So it's true, she murmured. You're really doing it. It's already done, he replied. Conway sighed and removed her gloves. You know what this means. They'll label you a terrorist, maybe worse. You'll never see another sunrise without a bounty on your head. Sunrises are overrated, he said. She shook her head. You could have asked for help. From who? The same board that let children starve behind quarantine walls? I asked once. They answered with silence, her voice softened. You're not wrong about them, but there were better ways. He smiled faintly. Maybe for people who still have faith in systems. I lost mine years ago. Conway stepped closer. Then why risk everything for aliens you barely know? He met her gaze steadily. Because they're alive. Because I've spent half my life patching the damage humans leave behind, and for once I wanted to stop the bleeding instead of covering it up. Something flickered across her expression. Respect, or maybe sorrow. They'll come for you within the hour, she said. Let me take you in quietly. I can stall the tribunal, claim you acted under medical duress, Jonas chuckled. You'd lie for me? I'd delay for you, she corrected. That's all I can promise, he shook his head. You've already done enough by coming here alone. The beacon beeped once, the transmission complete. He turned it off and slipped the chip from its slot, tucking it into his pocket. It's over, he said softly. The data's gone. Conway stared at him for a long moment, then looked toward the window. You're out of time. They heard the approach before they saw it. Engines, boots, the unmistakable thrum of armored transports. Red light flashed across the bakery walls. Jonas glanced toward the back exit, but Conway caught his arm. If you run now, they'll shoot first, she warned. Surrender and maybe— No, he interrupted gently. They can't find you here, go. I can't just walk away, then you'll die beside me. Her jaw tightened. You think I care about that? He smiled, the faint ghost of humor that always softened his defiance. I think you care more than you want to admit. For a moment, the rain filled the silence between them, relentless and steady. Then she sighed. You never change, Hale. Maybe that's the only thing about me worth saving. The first blast hit the sidewall, scattering flour and dust across the room. Jonas ducked behind the counter as the front windows shattered. The second blast tore through the doorway, sending shards of glass like starlight across the floor. Conway drew her weapon, crouching beside him. They're using live rounds, she said grimly. They're not here to arrest you. They're here to erase you. Jonas grabbed a metal pipe from under the counter and grinned through the dust. Then let's make them earn their pay. The door burst inward. Armored soldiers flooded the bakery, their visors reflecting the glow of emergency lights. Jonas moved first, swinging the pipe into the nearest trooper's chest plate. The man fell backward with a grunt. Conway's blaster flashed twice, disarming another, but there were too many. Jonas ducked as energy bolts scorched the shelves behind him. The air filled with the smell of burning yeast and ozone. He rolled toward the back door, firing the pulse pistol he had kept from the shelter. One shot hit a ceiling pipe, releasing a burst of steam that clouded the room. Now, Conway shouted. They sprinted through the smoke into the alley, boots pounding on wet stone. Behind them, the bakery burned, his quiet life dissolving into flame. Jonas didn't look back. They reached the old tram tunnel beneath the transport hub. The air was thick with dust, the walls trembling from distant blasts. Conway leaned against the railing, breathing hard. We can't keep this up, she said. They've sealed every route. Jonas pointed down the tunnel. There's a service hatch half a kilometer ahead. Leads to the canyon ridge, she frowned. That's a dead end. Not if you know the jumps. He started walking. She followed. For a while, the only sound was their footsteps echoing through the dark. Then Conway spoke, her voice quieter. What happens when they catch you? I don't plan to give them the chance, and if you do, then I tell them the truth. That you did all this for a woman and a child? He smiled faintly. That I did it for us. For everyone who forgot we were supposed to help each other. She looked at him through the dim light. You're still the idealist I met during the war. He laughed softly. Idealism's just stubborn hope with better PR. When they reached the hatch, Conway stopped him. Jonas, wait, he turned. She stepped closer, rainwater still shining on her face. If you make it out of here, if by some miracle you reach the ridge, what then? I find them, he said. Make sure they're safe, and after that? He hesitated. After that, I don't know. She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. You always did live without a map. Maps don't show the important places, he said quietly. Just the ones everyone already knows. Conway smiled sadly. Then go. Before I change my mind. He squeezed her shoulder once, gratitude unspoken. Take care of yourself, Marshall. You too, Baker. He climbed through the hatch into the storm above. The canyon wind struck him like a wall, hot and wild. Below, the city glowed in shades of red and silver, sirens echoing faintly against the rock. Jonas stood on the ridge for a long moment, breathing the air that still tasted of fire. Then he pulled the transmitter chip from his pocket and tossed it into the darkness. It vanished into the ravine below, the final secret buried where no one would find it. Somewhere beyond those canyons, Myra and Leorayan waited, 2 lives bought with his defiance. That thought steadied him more than any plan. He turned away from the city and began to walk. Hours later, in the free port camp beyond the ridge, Myra sat beside a small fire, holding Leorayan close. The child had fallen asleep mid-sentence, clutching her drawing pad against her chest. Myra's eyes remained fixed on the distant glow of Valor. Every flash of lightning painted her face with equal parts fear and hope. When the ground trembled faintly beneath her, she looked up. A silhouette was moving along the ridge, tall, limping, wrapped in rain and dust. For a heartbeat, she thought it was another dream. Then the figure stepped into the light of the campfire. Jonas, she breathed. He smiled through exhaustion, every line of his face etched with soot and rain. Told you I'd teach you both how to make starbread. Leorayan stirred, eyes blinking open. Bread man? Hey, little thief, he said softly. Miss me? She launched herself into his arms before he could answer. Myra rose, tears already breaking loose. She touched his shoulder as if afraid he might vanish again. You came back, she whispered. I tried to stay away. He admitted. Didn't work. Her laughter trembled like a song barely remembered. She cupped his face, tracing the streaks of grime across his skin. You look terrible, he grinned. Best compliment I've had in months. The firelight flickered between them, warm against the cold night. Behind them, the storm began to fade, the clouds parting just enough for the first stars to show. Myra followed his gaze upward. You think it's over? He shook his head. No, but it's beginning to change. She took his hand, fingers intertwining with his. Then let's build something worth all the breaking, he squeezed back. Deal. Above the canyons, the stars burned brighter, silent witnesses to 2 exiles who had found a reason to believe again. Dawn broke over the canyons like a secret slowly unfolding. The storm had passed, leaving the sky washed clean, a pale gold stretching from horizon to horizon. Thin trails of smoke still rose from the distant city of Valor, but out here the air smelled of rain and iron and the promise of survival. Jonas Hale woke to the crackle of firewood and the quiet hum of a camp stirring to life. His muscles ached, his palms were bandaged, yet for the first time in years his heartbeat was steady. He turned his head and saw Myra kneeling by the fire, her silver hair catching the morning light. Leorayan sat beside her, drawing circles in the dirt with a stick. For a moment Jonas simply watched them, the small, fragile piece of peace he had never thought he would find. Myra noticed his gaze. You should still be resting, she said softly. He smiled faintly. You sound like someone who's been listening to a medic. I sound like someone who's learned to worry. Her tone carried a warmth that melted the chill from the morning. Worry less, he said. I'm too stubborn to die, she arched an eyebrow. That's not comforting. Leorayan giggled. Mama says stubborn people make the best heroes. Jonas grinned. Then I guess I'm overqualified. As the day brightened, the refugees in the camp began to gather supplies. Word had spread quickly. The stolen data Jonas leaked was already making waves. Across the colonies, transmissions spoke of tribunals forming, corporate heads resigning, and hidden atrocities uncovered. Humanity was finally looking at its reflection and seeing the blood it had tried to wash away. One of the scouts, a wiry man with rust-colored skin, approached their fire. You're the one they call the Baker? He asked. Jonas nodded. Guilty. The people here, they say your broadcast reached even the inner systems. You started something bigger than you think. Jonas poked at the fire with a stick. I didn't start anything. I just told the truth. That's all revolutions ever need, the scout said before walking away. Myra's gaze lingered on him. Do you believe it's really over? No, Jonas admitted. But maybe it's the first crack in the wall. She reached for the bread resting on a flat stone near the fire, the last loaf from the dough he'd carried across the desert. Then we build from that crack. He watched her tear the bread into 3 pieces and hand one to Leoran. The child's smile was bright enough to rival the sunrise. Later, when the sun climbed high, Jonas climbed to the ridge overlooking the canyon. From there, the city was just a blur of metal and smoke. He could still hear faint echoes of patrol drones, but none dared come this far. He took a deep breath, the wind stinging his face. He didn't hear Mara approach until her shadow fell beside him. "You still miss it?" she said quietly. He shrugged. "I miss the smell of baking, the noise of the market, the feeling of being part of something ordinary." "You were never ordinary," she said. "You were always a flame trying to burn through stone." He looked at her then, really looked. The delicate lines at the corners of her eyes, the quiet strength in her posture. "Flames die fast," he said. "You're the one who survives." Mara smiled faintly. "Maybe, but even a flame leaves warmth behind." Her hand brushed his, a touch so light he almost thought he imagined it. "Come back to the fire," she whispered. "Leoran is asking when you'll teach her to bake the stars." He chuckled. "Let's not keep the apprentice waiting." They returned to the camp where a makeshift table had been set up, a sheet of metal balanced on crates. Leoran stood behind it proudly, flour dusting her hair like snow. "Breadman, I made dough." Jonas examined the mixture. "You mean this?" The girl nodded eagerly. He poked it. You might have accidentally invented glue." Myra laughed, the sound light and real. "She has your stubbornness, and your bravery," he replied. Together they kneaded, folded, and shaped the dough. Others in the camp gathered around, drawn by the simple rhythm of creation, the sound of hands working instead of fighting. For a brief, precious hour, no one spoke of patrols or hunger or loss. They just watched bread rise against the odds. When the first loaf came out golden and warm, the smell drifted through the camp like a memory of home. Jonas broke the loaf into pieces and handed them out. "Eat," he said. "It's not much, but it's ours." The refugees took it with reverence as if he had handed them hope made tangible. Leoran clapped her hands. "Starbread," she declared proudly, and in that moment, it truly felt like it. That night, as the stars began to bloom across the black sky, the camp gathered around the fire. Someone began to play an old string instrument, its melody soft and yearning. Mara sat beside Jonas, the flames painting her skin in gold and amber. She watched the people eating, laughing, breathing freely. "You gave them this," she said. He shook his head. "They gave it to themselves. I just baked the first batch." Her eyes glistened. "You don't see what you are, do you? You're the reminder that even the ones who break things can still fix something." He met her gaze. "And you're the reason I wanted to." For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The music faded, replaced by the soft whisper of wind through the canyon. Then Mara leaned closer, her voice barely above a breath. "You've done enough running, Jonas of Bread." He smiled gently. "Then what should I do now?" "Stay." The word hung in the air, fragile and certain. He didn't answer, but the warmth in his chest spoke louder than words. As the fire dwindled to embers, Jonas lay awake under the open sky. Leoran slept between him and Myra, her small hand resting over his heart. He stared at the stars, billions of distant lights scattered across infinity, so many of them unreachable yet bright. He thought of the lives his broadcast might touch, of strangers reading his words, of the quiet changes that might begin in places he would never see. Maybe that was the real measure of being human. Not in the wars fought or the empires built, but in the moments when someone decided that compassion mattered more than comfort. He closed his eyes, the stars blurring behind his eyelids. When morning came again, the camp was stirring with news. A merchant ship from the inner worlds had arrived, bearing supplies and a message from sympathetic colonies. The data leak had sparked hearings and new trade routes were being opened to the refugee sectors. For the first time, there was talk of peace, fragile, uncertain, but real. Jonas stood by the camp's edge, watching as children chased each other through the dust. Myra approached with 2 cups of brewed grain tea, steam rising between them. "The universe is changing," she said. He accepted the cup. "Slowly, but change always starts slow. Will you go with the ship when it leaves?" He looked at her, the question heavy between them. "Do you want me to?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "I want you where you're needed. But I'd rather you stayed, he smiled softly. Then I'm staying. She exhaled, relief and gratitude mingling in one quiet breath. Good. They stood side by side, watching the sun climb higher, painting the canyon walls in colors too vivid to be forgotten. By evening, the camp had begun to grow into something more. Walls repaired, tents replaced with shelters, laughter rising over the sound of hammers. Jonas helped build ovens from scrap stone and steel, showing others how to bake. Children ran errands for ingredients, eager to learn. The smell of bread drifted again through the desert, the scent of resilience. As twilight descended, Mara found him near the ovens, wiping soot from his hands. You've started a tradition, she said. He grinned. Maybe one day someone else will take over. I'm getting too old for this. You'll never stop, she teased. Probably not. She stepped closer. The firelight reflected in her eyes, turning them molten gold. Do you know what your people call a man who feeds others without asking anything in return? Fool? He guessed. She smiled. Savior. He shook his head. No. Just human. Myra's hand slipped into his, their fingers fitting together naturally, like they had always been meant to. Then humanity has hope after all, she whispered. He leaned closer, his voice steady and soft. Hope is the one thing they can't outlaw. Their foreheads touched lightly, the fire crackling around them, stars blooming above. The universe felt vast, but for the first time, neither of them felt small within it. Much later, when the night had deepened and the camp was quiet, Jonas wrote a final note in his journal, the same battered notebook he had carried since the war. If anyone finds this, know that mercy is never wasted. It ripples outward, touching lives you'll never meet. We are more than the worlds we destroy. We are the light we leave behind. He closed the notebook and placed it beside the oven before turning back toward the sleeping camp. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the sand. Jonas lay beside Myra and Leoran, his hand resting near theirs. The stars above shimmered, reflected in her silver hair. For the first time in a lifetime of battles, Jonas Hale slept without fear. And as dawn returned once more to Valor's horizon, the light that rose over the canyon carried the quiet truth he had fought for. That even in the ruins of war and hunger, the smallest act of kindness could rebuild the universe one loaf at a time.